I find is that many people who love and they want to follow Jesus and they have a high view of the scriptures, a high view of their authority and origins as a divine word to God's people. And that's a conviction that I hold too. But what I find is that people tend to hold that view in a way that makes the accessible, knowable, look it up on Wikipedia, history of the Bible actually makes it somewhat dangerous. There's some category shifting that needs to take place, and I at least want to put the categories on the table, help us identify the problem, and maybe this isn't your problem, but I guarantee that it's a problem for somebody that you know and care about. So our mission is to talk about the history of the making of the Bible. Why? Some of you are just history nerds, and this is interesting to you. Or maybe you've been following Jesus for a very long time, and so you care about the Bible, and it's interesting to you to think about where it came from. But that's not normal behavior in our culture. For the most part, like, why would learning about the origins of an ancient text written in languages that nobody quite even speaks those languages that way anymore, and why would you care about this? So really what I want to start talking about is why. And maybe let me kind of couch it in a narrative. So I had incredible mentors and guides and professors who helped give me a framework for not just the confession or the conviction that the Bible is God's word, although that was really core to my early experience of following Jesus in my early 20s. But hand in hand, that went with an understanding that the Bible is also a human book with a thoroughly human history. And that's what I was fascinated with, that connection and Jesus' Jewish heritage and where the Bible came from and all of that. I just couldn't get enough of it. And so a Jewish studies department where I could study the Hebrew Bible, ancient Judaism, and early Christianity as a Jewish messianic movement, I was in heaven. Dead Sea Scrolls, the whole thing. It was just wonderful. But here's something interesting that I discovered. So, it was a diverse department in terms of religious backgrounds. So there were Jews and Christians in that graduate department, and Jews of all stripes and Christians of all stripes. And something that I noticed was, as we were taking seminars in like ancient Israelite religion or archaeology or something like that, and we're getting exposed to the very earthy, pun intended, earthy, right? Historical human origins of the Bible. What I notice is that some of my colleagues, who I know are people of faith or they're followers of Jesus, and we're having cups of coffee, on Friday afternoons to close out the week, and they're having a crisis of faith as they're learning about all of this. And I'm having exactly the opposite experience. Like, I'm just falling more in love with what the Bible is and where it came from and how it points to Jesus as I learn even more than I ever knew about its human history and origins. Are you with me? And so I was really perplexed about this, because I was like, what's happening in their understanding of what the Bible is, that when they learn the history of its origins, it's a scandal to their faith. And then I started teaching, like you had to do student teaching experiences at the universities. You're getting your PhD. And so, I'm doing these big lecture classes for all these freshmen, like Intro to Judaism or Intro to Biblical Literature. And I'm having cups of coffee like you wouldn't believe on State Street with all of these undergrads who are having a crisis of faith because they're learning about the very public, openly accessible, knowable human history of the Bible. So then it began to dawn on me, like, something's broken in the system of Western churchianity, something, where somehow people are being raised and acculturated with a view of the Bible that makes its human history a scandal. And so I've really tried to get to the bottom of this.
All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
The Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus.
Yeah. When we say as an organization, we want to help people experience the Bible a certain way,
Yeah.
as a unified story that leads to Jesus, that also raises the question when you hear it, oh, well, how have I been experiencing the Bible?
Right.
Is that how I experience the Bible?
Mm-hmm.
And if not, why not? And what does it involve then to engage the Bible this way? I'm pleased with it as a tagline for what we're doing with all of our content, but it also begs a whole bunch of questions that need to be unpacked.
Right.
And as time goes on and we use it more, we've realized that we need to unpack it.
Right. And I've realized we've been using all this other vernacular sometimes. Like it's wisdom literature.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
meditation literature.
Yes, yeah.
And so how does that all work together? What do we mean when we use those phrases? And how does that fit with this idea of it's a unified story that leads to Jesus?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to do. We've worked out, at least as far as we can discern at the moment, 7 different aspects to what's involved in that short little summary.
Right.
We're calling it our paradigm or our approach to the Bible.
Right. The shorthand has been for us the paradigm. And so if our mission is to experience the Bible through this paradigm, then what is this paradigm?
Yeah.
And like you said, is it the paradigm we're coming to the Bible with? And then how do we adjust our paradigm to this one?
That's right. Maybe we should not take for granted that the word paradigm is like a normal word that people use.
Yeah, what does that mean? A paradigm?
Yeah. I mean, I've got a rough definition. I haven't looked up a dictionary definition for a long time. So here, this is in Classic Greek Dictionary by Liddell and Scott.
Okay.
It's the standard dictionary of classical Greek. So you want to read the New Testament or Homer or Plato. This is your dictionary. So
Okay.
Paterdeigma, pattern or model, originally used of an architect's model. First used in Herodotus. That's interesting. And then of examples or models. Platonic ideals. In Platonic philosophy, there's reality, but then there's these non-physical ideals, and those are called paterdeigmas. Yeah, so that's different.
Yeah.
You could say that's where the word began life.
Yeah.
But then as you just read that definition. So a paradigm, it's not something so much that you think about. It's a framework for understanding reality that you take for granted, and then you think within that.
Yeah.
And so it's actually very difficult to step back from your own paradigm
Yes.
and tinker with it. And you have to be exposed to other views of reality and understand them, and then understand how your own differs. And then you begin to see the fishbowl that you've been swimming in but have never seen the glass kind of thing. That's been my way of thinking about paradigms.
Yeah, so what would be a really good concrete example of that might really bring it home? I don't know why this came to mind. I think people understand maybe, are you an optimist or are you a pessimist?
Okay, sure.
And this is a simplification, but you can have a paradigm, an understanding of how the world works, which makes you anticipate problems and then get deflated by problems, or just anticipate them and want to solve them proactively. And so that's kind of, would you call that a paradigm?
Yeah, it's a set of expectations I bring to reality that have helped me make sense of my life experience.
Right.
But then sometimes they don't make sense. Things happen that don't fit my understanding of how the world works or relationships work. And then I'm either going to find a way to explain it within my existing paradigm, or I'm going to let it crack my paradigm and force me to maybe see the world in a new way.
Yeah.
There's good examples in psychology, just how human psychology develops, about how children develop models of human relationships, paradigms from their family of origins. And we'd all develop our own ways of dealing with grief or conflict, But then what often happens to a young person in their teens or 20s is their circles of relationship widen.
Yeah.
And there are ways of thinking about relationships that were formed in one type of setting. We now put them to work in other relationships that maybe it's totally different dynamic. And usually that's when people begin to discover
New paradigms.
that they need to see a therapist. But needing to see a therapist is somebody outside myself pointing out like, well, you assume this about people.
Right.
And it's constantly causing this problem in your relationship. Why do you assume that about people? And that kind of thing. Well, oh, wow, that's how.
And it's interesting that a crisis of paradigm often leads you to need a guide.
Yes.
Because it's actually really difficult,
Yes.
disequilibrating, and can be scary and then emotionally taxing.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when a very firmly believed paradigm
Sure.
begins to like fall out underneath you.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, now what?
That's right. And sometimes, yeah, it does come together in a book or a relationship or an event that just cracks your view of reality.
Yeah.
I think there are also people and times for whom it happens slowly over time.
Right.
It's certainly been my experience. It's a new frame, and we need to reframe. And this was college when all this woke up to me. I felt like I had been living in the Matrix. And it was also when those movies came out.
Yeah, that's right. Late 90s.
And I had a number of professors who were, gifted at helping young adults expose their paradigms of reality, and not to ditch them, but to begin to critique them and hopefully improve them.
Yeah.
So it was a habit that I learned to develop, to self-critique and be suspicious of my view of reality.
Yeah.
Because by definition, it's something you don't know and don't notice about your own patterns of thinking. It's vitally important that we bring out those paradigms into the open so we can tinker with them, because there are some more helpful paradigms
Yeah.
that are more in tune with what the Bible is
Yeah.
and designed to do. And then there are, a charitable way is to say, I think, less helpful paradigms. Reframe to say we can actually do many of the same things that our unhelpful paradigms want us to do, but in a frame that's more in tune with the Bible.
Biblical writer is writing this down, recording whatever he's recording. I think his entire intent is to be reliable in the things he's recounting. But I will say it's not going to conform in certain respects to what we would expect a historian today to do, or historians today would expect to do. And my own view is that that's unnecessary. It is unnecessary for me to take my modern context of how we do history and impose it on the biblical writer and then judge the results according to the failure to live up to my standard that I imposed.
Whether you think this or not, your neighbors and your coworkers who don't follow Jesus think that you think this. And therefore, that's what they think about the Bible, that it's like a divine behavior manual dropped out of the sky. And that's not at all how the Bible presents itself. It presents itself as telling the story, the first mention, telling the story of what God has been doing in history to save and to form a people. And then secondly, it's about how God has invited those rescued people into an intimate covenant relationship where they will adhere to a whole new value system and a whole new way of life together, so that together they can mediate God's blessing and a different vision of the human community out to all of the nations. There you go. That's it. That's the Bible. That's the Bible. Now, of course, the Bible is just beginning to be written here, but the meaning of the Bible, it's all right there. That's the meaning of the Bible. It's telling the story of what God has been doing to save and form a people, and then it invites those saved people into a covenant relationship so they can become his emissaries out to all of the nations, that there's a different way of being human because of the love and the mercy and justice of God. That's the meaning of the Bible. That's it. It's telling a story and inviting you into a personal connection with the God who created you and who's provided rescue for you. That's how the Bible presents itself. And it presents itself as a thoroughly human document that speaks a divine word to God's people. You guys with me? So it's actually not that complicated. I know the Bible is a very long book, and there are lots of complicated things about the Bible, but on this point, it's not that complicated. And the problem is that there are all kinds of rival versions out there about what the Bible is. It's a divine behavior manual dropped out of heaven to tell you the bad things that you should not do and the good things that you should do so that you go to the good place and not the bad place after you die. That's how many people think about what the Bible is. And do you understand that's not how the Bible presents itself? Like, not at all.
So emphatically, what we're attempting to do is adopt a paradigm, a set of expectations and a view that is native to the biblical literature itself.
The way the Bible thinks of itself?
The way that it was designed, the assumptions with which it was designed and created. And we're looking for a paradigm that's in tune with what the Bible was designed to do. We've used a lot of illustrations over the years of, like, if you think a cookbook is a grocery list, you can make the cookbook work for you.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great grocery list, I suppose, because you can get groceries that will cook some meals.
Yeah, that's right. There's a list of food.
There's a list of food in there.
At the beginning of, every recipe. So it can be a guide. But it probably won't help you at the grocery store do a number of other things. You probably need more than just what's on that recipe. So it's not a very good grocery list, because a grocery list should do a bunch of other things.
Like, a grocery list should get you groceries for the whole week, not just for one meal.
Totally. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you go to the grocery store and only get the recipe stuff, you won't get a bunch of other things that you need.
Yeah.
So it can't give you everything that you need to accomplish a certain purpose. But then also you misapply or misuse what the cookbook is for, because it's meant to do a bunch of other things than just give you a grocery list. So that's kind of a silly example, but it gets the point across.
The way that you view what a book is for, what a book does, will shape then how you approach it and what you get out of it.
That's right. And so what is liable to happen is that you'll both miss what that text was trying to communicate with its own agenda and on its own terms, and that's sad.
Yeah.
But then also, I'm likely to misuse it as I make it do things that it wasn't really designed to do. And it's like a double whammy. So you could think of other examples, but I like the cookbook. There's 3 ways these unhelpful paradigms manifest themselves. I have found language that I'm happy with that gets underneath all of them. Like, what are all of them have in common? So the language I've put to it is, I call it a reference book mentality in relating to the Bible. In other words, reference books play an interesting role in a person's library. Now there's, online encyclopedias, so those kind of function in that way. But, when I get on Wikipedia or when I turn to a handful of dictionaries, encyclopedias, it's usually that I have a question, a need, I'm confused in some way.
I'm bringing my question to the resource.
That's it. And so I don't read it from front to back.
Right.
That's not how you treat a reference book. A mature relationship with a reference book means knowing where to find
the answer you're looking for.
The answer or the part that will address the need, question, confusion.
Yeah.
And I think that reference book approach gets expressed in a number of different ways.
Oh, okay.
3 different ways that we've kind of named. And here's the trick, is that it's not bad to come to the Bible with felt needs and questions. It's not
like, it makes sense that you would want to treat the Bible like a reference book.
Totally. Yes, that's right. I think the main thing that we want to say is the Bible actually is capable of addressing my questions and felt needs, but the way that it does it is not like a reference book. It can actually do those things, but in ways that are going to take some adjustment. So, for example, one approach of this is being introduced to the Bible as the Theology dictionary, a theology reference book. So, who and what are human beings? Who or what is God? What's good? What's bad? What's the problem in the world and with people?
Yeah.
Is there a solution? What has God been doing?
Yeah. How many angels are there? What are
Sure.
their names?
But also, how old is the world? By what processes, physical processes, did the world as we know it come into being?
Yeah. How does God make decisions about things?
Yeah. How does God operate? How do I make sense of suffering or evil? Who is Jesus? Was he who he really says he was, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. How should we do church?
How should we do church? How should we structure our church?
Yeah.
How should I talk with my friend who's dealing with this issue in their life, and so on? And so, my first year at Bible college, I went through a couple systematic theology classes, and that was basically the approach. It was like God.
Yes.
It was one whole topic, just God.
Yeah.
And it was like a systematic explanation from this tradition's point of view, but it was always based in the Bible, but it was by turning to pages in the Bible and
Yes.
reading one sentence
Right.
or reading a paragraph.
A lot of my classes were like, because you had anthropology, soteriology,
all
the Christology.
Gs. That's
It's
right.
just like all like,
Yeah.
what's the nature of angels? What's the
That's
nature
right.
of Jesus? What's the nature of humans?
So the intuition underneath that approach makes all the sense in the world. The biblical text is designed to shape my view of reality and of what's true about God
I
and the
should
world.
be able to have an ology about something.
Yeah, the Bible is the kind of text that is designed to generate worlds and shape our imaginations and our view of everything. So the question is, what modes of engaging the Bible are going to accomplish that task best? And so one paradigm shift we want to invite people to is that a reference book skill set will not allow the Bible to do what it's designed to do.
What's up, everybody? I want to thank you so much for watching. 2007, I graduated with a Bible major, and I thought I knew what the Bible was. 3 years ago, I discovered the Bible Project, and I found out that I knew nothing, and that I went through a process over the past 3 years of completely rediscovering the Bible on its own terms, and I still have so much to learn. And I want you guys to come along the journey with me. This is an awesome series. We're going to be exploring what is the Bible, rediscovering the Bible on its own terms. We'll have several installments in this series, and I think you're going to love it. I want to ask, if you guys haven't already, please subscribe. To those of you who have, thank you so much. Our channel is growing rapidly, and the scope and range that God's giving this channel is just blowing my mind, and I'm so excited for what's coming. So if you could, press the like button, share this, subscribe, do what you can do to help us get this message out about what God has done for this world and the good news that we have because of Jesus. Let's discover the Bible together.
About. In 2 Timothy 3:16, we read, all scripture is breathed out. The Greek word is theopneustos. By God, breathed out, given by God, and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, so that in order that, the Greek word is hina, the man of God may be competent, equipped for every good work. Now this speaks to divine origin. It does not speak to God whispering every word that we see on the page into the ear of the writer. The writers don't need that. They have been prepared throughout their whole lives to be the writer that God wanted at this given time in history. Every experience they had in life, the way they grew up, their education level, the things that happened to them, the people they met, everything in their lives, God was in charge of. He prepares them providentially for a specific task because God knows that I'm going to take this person, Matthew, John, Moses, whoever. I'm going to take this person. There's going to come a time in their life when I'm going to want them to write something down for posterity. And so God prepares them for that moment. Okay? He doesn't need to whisper the words into the ear of the writer because they're fully capable of doing the job. So 2 Timothy 3:16 is not a good proof text for this idea of God standing behind Isaiah and just doing one of these in his ear, or putting him into a trance or downloading it into his brain. It's not how it works, and we can tell that from the text.
Is that the Bible should shape my view of reality and what's true about the world, God, myself, and others.
And when we say should, what we're saying is that's what these texts have always done and were designed to do.
Yes. But how does it do it? It doesn't do it as a reference book where you find the Bible answers.
Yeah.
It does it as...
It does it through the medium of narrative and poetry and first century letters.
Yeah. And then we'll get to this.
Yeah.
But it becomes meditation literature.
Yeah.
And
We'll
wisdom
get there.
literature. Okay.
That's right. The second one should maybe take less time because it's just, instead of coming with theological questions, it's coming with moral or ethical questions.
Okay.
So another predominant reference book approach to the Bible is treating it as a moral handbook or a rule book. And you had a lot of traction or experience of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're growing up.
Totally. But it's tricky because if you're paying attention just a little bit, you realize there's no consistency in kind of how that's done.
Oh, from tradition to tradition.
Even within the tradition.
Oh, even within Christian traditions.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, within my
Totally.
tradition.
Yeah,
It's just like,
yeah,
cool,
yeah.
we're really set on this rule here because Paul said this in this letter. But he also says this over here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
And we actually don't think that
and then
matters.
Leviticus says this over here.
Right. And that's, yeah.
Right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And so,
So you're saying there's these unspoken assumptions at work where in each Christian tradition, and it differs from tradition to tradition, these are the parts of the Bible that we take as face value as moral guidelines. But then there's other parts of the Bible, and we have a special approach to that.
right.
We have a way to explain why that's different than the part we appeal to. And then what's tricky is outsiders to that tradition, whether they're other Christians or people who don't follow Jesus or didn't grow up around the Christian tradition, it's confusing. And in Christianized cultures, historically Christianized cultures, it's very confusing to people who aren't followers of Jesus to say the times that Christians in public appeal to this book, it's usually when moral issues
Oh, right. Yeah.
are at stake.
Yeah.
A Christian will say, I have this moral conviction because it says this in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so people who don't follow Jesus, that trains them too, that the Bible is a moral rule book. That's primarily what it's designed to do.
Yeah.
And then people who don't follow Jesus will read the Bible. Those often start at the beginning. And then they'll get to the law codes in the Old Testament. And they're like, what? Tell me this is from your moral handbook, about stoning somebody who breaks a Sabbath.
Right.
Or whatever. So if even inside and outside the tradition, it feels inconsistent. People can sense that pretty easily.
Right.
That's one liability of
Yes.
the moral handbook approach.
Well, and in my tradition, it was with the Old Testament laws, there was kind of this understanding of you're not doing those things. Although even there it was inconsistent because every once in a while it's like, but that one there,
Yeah, you quote. Yep, exactly.
I mean, like the 10 Commandments, except
Yeah.
for the Sabbath.
Right. Well, that's right.
But there were certain ones in there that were really important to point out. But then obviously other ones that you're just like, of course not. But then where it got a little bit more strict was New Testament letters. Like if it's in the New Testament letter,
Sure.
that's a rule. But then even there, you would find opportunities to kind of
That's right.
fudge
Yeah.
it a little bit.
That's right. And we explored that in our series on how to read the New Testament letters at length.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the same letter, you'll find greet one another in the church with a holy kiss. Drink a little wine. Don't just drink only water. And also appoint deacons and elders and, all these instructions. And, which ones are binding from the rule book and so on.
And there's a really strong impulse to want to have the Bible help us decide what is good and bad.
That's right.
Because we don't want to go off the rails. And there's this concern of if you don't treat the Bible as a rule book, or if you can't at least find enough rules in the Bible that keep us in the rails, then it's all going to just fall apart.
Yeah, we've been problematizing this approach. So let's name what is also a right intuition underneath this. That the Bible, the texts that are in the Bible, were designed to give instruction and guidance to God's people about what is right and what is just and what is good and beautiful, so that God's people can live in a certain way in the world. It's a vision of what it means to be a human.
Be righteous,
Yeah.
to use a biblical word.
Yeah, to do right by God and other people. So the Bible is a set of texts that are designed to shape people who know how to discern what's good and bad. And without a doubt, that's what they're designed to do. And they explicitly talk about that. What we're talking about is how you engage the Bible to help it do that in the life of a person or a community. And what we're saying is a reference book. What do I do in this situation? Turn to this page, turn to this sentence. That's not an approach that engages the Bible the way it's designed to do that. And so for me, it points all the way back to whatever moral or ethical guidance the Bible is giving. It's not a systematic statement of that as such. If it was, it would be a lot more clear to a lot more people throughout the last, few millennia. So the way that communities get moral and ethical guidance from the scriptures is a dynamic process. And the way a given tradition has developed a way of doing that, it's very easy to think, well, that's the way it ought to be done. And I do think there are better, more helpful and less helpful ways that communities do that. But it is a dynamic process. Yeah, the whole premise of the first story of humans in the Bible is about who gets to define what's good and what's bad.
And God gets to.
Humans are God.
Yeah.
That's what the whole story is about. It's about producing people who can discern what's good from what's not good.
And the Torah itself, the Bible itself, was thought of as a tree of life that's supposed to bring you to help you understand.
Absolutely. So yeah, moral or ethical formation of people and their character and of communities and how they live in the world. But the question is, how do I get the Bible
Yes.
how does the Bible accomplish that
And
task?
it's not by treating it as a handbook.
And treating it as a rule book
Won't get you there.
won't allow the Bible to do what it was designed to do. The communities that are going to embody that ethical vision, that moral vision of what it means to be human, will be a whole bunch of diverse expressions because the human family, there's so many different cultures. It does seem to me there will be core universal convictions that are kind of core to human nature and experience.
Yeah. Like do not murder.
Totally. For example.
And this is where it's confusing because that's a law in the Bible. It's a rule in the Bible that Moses gives.
Yep.
And it's also a rule we live by. And it's a rule that you would anticipate every Christian in any context, no matter what, should always live by. So then all of a sudden you're kind of like, oh, well, then the Bible does have rules. And so I need to find more of those in the Bible.
Okay, so that's a good example. Do not murder. So it's formulated as a moral guideline in the Ten Commandments. Jesus himself quotes it.
Yeah.
But then also says there's a lot more to it. And he gets underneath it and he starts to give these case studies examples about how anger and dishonoring people publicly, making fun of them,
Calling them names.
devaluing them, belittling language, that this itself is akin to murder. And all of a sudden, you're like, well, is there a rule anywhere of don't ever make fun of somebody or belittle them? Well, that seems to be what Jesus is getting at. Now we're to the question of, as a rule book tells you what to do. Wisdom literature is about forming certain kinds of people who need thin rule books because the spirit and the core convictions that are expressed in different rules are written into their character. And I think this is the vision of human beings that Jesus was trying to paint in what we call the Sermon on the Mount.
So with what Jesus does with that rule of do not murder, kind of shows you that if you just come and go, okay, there's a rule, do not murder, and then I'm going to not do that thing and I'll be good.
Yeah.
Jesus is saying like, actually, no, let's meditate on it.
Totally.
Let's treat it as wisdom. What's underneath that? And now all of a sudden, it's not just whether or not you're killing someone, it's how you're the language you use towards people becomes a rule of sorts, a rule of life, a way of monitoring our behavior.
And what honoring the Bible as wisdom literature does also, and as narrative and meditation literature, is recognizing there's a lot of other ways the Bible addresses murder that aren't through moral rules. Cain and Abel begins a major motif of depicting violence and murder. It's a profound exploration of the meaning of murder. And then to follow the train of that motif through the narrative of Genesis through 2 Kings. And it's a sustained meditation on the problem of violence and murder in human communities. And if you don't have radar to know that there's a narrative exploration of this idea, this moral issue, if I'm only looking for rules, I'm going to miss out on all this other stuff the Bible's trying to say because I was looking for a reference sentence for it. So that's a good example of how using the Bible as a rule book, I'll miss out on what other things the Bible is trying to do. And then I'm likely to not even really use correctly the moral rule because just taking the Ten Commandments statement at face value, Jesus himself shows, no, it's so much more. There's more underneath that. I've been in a few settings before where I'm kind of working through this, and certain traditions of Protestants get really twitchy when you're like, the Bible's not a moral handbook.
Right.
And what we're not saying is the Bible isn't trying to shape our view of what's right and wrong. We are saying that. The question is, how does it accomplish that goal? And it actually does it in ways that many Christians haven't even thought to imagine yet, in powerful ways. But we
I look at inerrancy as sort of being reliable when it comes to historical matters. Okay, because to me that's a good word and a workable word, trustworthy and reliable, because it doesn't overclaim. Okay, I'm not going to use a term that would suggest that we might not learn something in the future, or that there might be a different or better way of understanding this or that thing, because again, we're dealing with limited data and whatnot. But when the biblical writer is writing this down, recording whatever he's recording, I think his entire intent is to be reliable in the things he's recounting. But I will say it's not going to conform in certain respects to what we would expect a historian today to do, or historians today would expect to do. And my own view is that that's unnecessary. It is unnecessary for me to take my modern context of how we do history and impose it on the biblical writer and then judge the results according to the failure to live up to my standard that I imposed. I think that's wrong-headed. For me to call something an error in Scripture, it would have to be something that there's really just no other way, there's no other conclusion to draw. He said A and it's B, and there's really no sort of getting out of it. It's a mistake or something like that. But you realize, when you get into this discussion, for instance, is the Bible allowed to use approximations? Let's just take numbers, for instance. Okay, like there's a particular battle in the Old Testament. One accounting says 24,000 died. Another one says like 23,000 some, or what. Is it okay if the writer uses a round number? He rounds off. Is that a sin? Is that an intent to deceive? Is it an intent to falsify? Okay, so all these considerations, it's hard to just give one sentence for inerrancy because you have all these qualifications. Is the biblical writer allowed to use the language of appearances? We do this every day. The sun rose. No, it didn't. I mean, it's an expression that everybody understands, but it's scientifically inaccurate. But it's acceptable within our culture. So is the biblical writer allowed to use these sorts of things and write from a perspective that doesn't conform to modern science? I mean, you already know my answer to this. This is why I distinguish between truth, propositions, and the means by which propositions are expressed. Okay, the means by which propositions are expressed are going to be things that, from our perspective, don't reflect the tools that we have of scientific inquiry. So I'm not going to impose my context, my knowledge base of the natural world on this ancient person. Because I don't think the truth proposition is to tell me, oh, Genesis 3, let's discuss snake anatomy. Let's discuss the zoology of snakes. I don't think that's the point at all. I think the truth proposition being given to us is something theological that helps frame the history of Israel or salvation history in general or whatever. And these are the means by which the writer is trying to do that. That's his goal. The truth propositions are the goal, not the way he's trying to express it. Because this can change. This is sort of a human thing. It's who the person is.
I've been thrilled to discover the world of digital whiteboards. First you have chalkboards, right? Yeah. Then you have whiteboards. Yeah. And now the next step.
You had the projector screens. That was in
there. Oh, yeah,
somewhere.
The overhead projectors. Yeah, that was next level. So digital whiteboards. Yeah. So I just went to some of our artists here at the Bible Project. I was like, give me your favorite digital drawing app. Yeah. This app called Procreate. Yeah. So I use it as a digital whiteboard for just very, simple drawings and so on. But then a couple of our artists showed me stuff they've done on Procreate, and it's stunning. Yeah. Stunning artwork. Uh-huh. And I realized I'm using Procreate as a whiteboard app, but I'm nowhere near tapping into the true capabilities of this thing. But I'm using it. It's working. I use it and it works good for what I need it to do. So what we're saying is kind of like that. For treating the Bible as a moral handbook. You can make it do those things, but you're going to miss out on its full capability and likely probably misuse it on some occasions with that paradigm and approach. Maybe that is a way of illustrating what we're getting at.
I think there's also a fear that this is just an excuse to reintroduce new morals
Oh, sure.
that are more socially acceptable or more palatable, instead of just being firm with like, there's just certain things we need to have rules and convictions about that aren't going to be easy.
Yep, sure. And so there is a whole other dynamic that is actually treated in the storyline of the Bible, which is that the way God's people express faithfulness to God has developed throughout time because God is working in and through people in their cultural context. And so the idea that Gentiles, non-Israelites, who might eat foods that have been sacrificed to other gods, but that like take them home and have them, that was such an appalling idea for some of the earliest
Morally
Messianic
repugnant.
Jews. Moral, not just like theologically, offensive, morally offensive. And so that was a paradigm shift that the Spirit took those early communities through. And so throughout church history, different church traditions have developed different views about how that process works. Some traditions think that dynamic and development just continues apace. And some say it continues up to a certain point. And some say it shouldn't continue at all, since, the statements of the apostles and the moral guidance they give. And so that gets us into other territory that we're not trying to get into so much. I think what we're trying to just say is let's honor the way that the biblical texts are designed to form people's moral worldviews. And what traditions and people are going to go do with that moral worldview, that would require somebody with a lot more knowledge of church history and other dynamics than just us. But that's an important conversation. Does that make any sense?
It does, but I guess what I'm saying is this paradigm, and we haven't really gotten to the paradigm, but if it's not a rule book, and I can't treat it as a rule book, then what we're saying is we're giving an opportunity for people then to design new rules, new rule books, potentially. And what I heard you saying was, then the Bible doesn't give the guardrails for when you've stepped out of line or not.
Oh, got it. Okay, if that's what you heard me saying, that's not
Okay.
quite what I'm trying to say. I think the Bible does provide a vision of, what is the good and the beautiful, but it provides it within a cultural framework of its authors, namely ancient Israelites and early Messianic Jews living in the first century. So the question is, how do we appropriate their framework and language in contexts that are totally different, in totally different culture and time and place? So it's not a free-for-all, but it is, how do we embody faithfulness to that moral vision of the biblical story? And historically, it's just a fact that Christian communities who pledge their allegiance to Jesus, who believe the scriptures give us a word from God, but they disagree on certain aspects of how to embody that faithfulness in a different setting. And that's just a fact of church history. And so you have to say either something's broken with the Bible, that it didn't provide us with that clarity. And so that's where a lot of people go, is they ditch the Bible. Or they say the Bible is providing a moral vision, but in a way that's different and has given birth to some different traditions and how they go about discerning right from wrong.
Well, isn't there also the position you're just not taking the Bible literally enough?
Oh, sure. Some traditions have that view, but it's my conviction that if you probe far enough, every tradition has its own incoherencies and idiosyncrasies that will show that it is itself a tradition. Yeah. We're getting into actually controversial territory here, I suppose, and that just is what it is. But I think it requires a lot of humility for leaders in different church traditions to be careful that we don't just assume that my tradition's reading the Bible is just its face value, very clear meaning. And you can also highlight how a certain tradition has developed a whole way of making sense of a certain moral vision, and then being very rigid about that. And then without realizing it, or maybe while realizing it, is doing all sorts of terrible, harmful things to people.
Yeah.
And not even thinking about it because it doesn't fit within their paradigm.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the example on the world stage right now is Protestant traditions, the European, American, white dominant Protestant traditions that elevated personal piety, personal morality, particularly sexual integrity, all the while, propping up, often with the Bible, propping up cultural institutions that were killing and enslaving people. And so it's that kind of thing where you just go, oh, if we can see that now with some kind of clarity, what are ways that my tradition is doing some other kind of analogous thing right now? That's what I'm just saying. We just need...
That's the humility.
It's the humility to just say, I can't just assume that my tradition's reading of the Bible, especially if it is a moral handbook reading, has been dropped out of heaven. Every tradition is going to introduce distortions into the moral vision of the Bible. And so we need to pay attention to church history of different traditions, people who are different than me, and trust that the Spirit will guide God's people. Because history hasn't stopped, and God's still at work in the world, guiding people into new uncharted territory. The question is, what story is giving that guidance? And yeah, there you go. That's where I'm at now, and it's a question that I'll be working on for the rest of my life. But I think by definition, it's a question God's people have to be working on for the rest of human history, because that's what it means to be human, right? To subdue the land and rule it as kings and queens and be stewards of creation is to go into new uncharted territory.
Yeah.
How you doing? So the last and third aspect of this reference book mentality we've called, I think you probably came up with this phrasing, but the Bible is a devotional grab bag. So the assumption underneath is the Bible exists, and I think this is the right intuition. The Bible exists to connect me, not just to ancient people and what they were trying to say, but to the presence of the living God and of the Spirit of God and the presence of Jesus, to put me in tune with that living one to help guide me in my life and my community in the world.
And that should be delightful.
Yes. Yeah. Discovery, fun, learning, challenge. Ahas. Yeah. Epiphanies, this kind of thing. The Bible is designed to overhaul your view of reality and connect you to the living God in a personal way. Totally what it's designed to do. The question is, how?
How does it do it? How does it do it?
So if I've developed a habit, and this is tricky because it's very personal, and I've kind of backed down on being so dogmatic about how I talk about this. Because I have my own favorite parts of the Bible.
Yeah.
And there are times when I go and read those favorite parts.
Yeah.
Because they remind me of things that are true and real, and I feel the warm fuzzies and so on. But the trick is that becomes my main mode of engaging the Bible. I go read that paragraph or just that sentence or just that part of a page, but I make sure not to read too far because like further in the paragraph is that one really crazy thing. And I don't know what to make of that, and so I avoid that. Like that's the devotional grab bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, right intuition, but poor execution.
Right. Because the execution becomes pick and choose. And when you do that, you lose the thrust of what the whole unified story that Jesus is trying to do.
Or the whole paragraph, or the whole story, or the whole letter or poem, or whatever it is.
And so all three of those, theological dictionary, moral handbook, devotional grab bag, there are three different ways of treating the Bible as a reference book. I haven't heard you frame it that way, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's more recent formula.
And the Bible is not a reference book. And so that begs the question, what kind of book is it? And that's what we're going to jump into. The shorthand we use is unified story leads to Jesus, but that begs a lot of questions. What does that mean? And so we'll jump in to unpack that. What kind of book is the Bible?